Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Welcome to day 12 again. Today, we're taking a second look at Grinding Gear Games' major live stream announcement. This took place about 15 hours ago, and I've been thinking about it, I've been chatting about it with people, and I wanted to come back with 6 of the highlights and also one of the lowlights out of the changes that have been made here. So we're going to discuss through some of those things, some of the things that have gotten better, some of the things that have gotten worse, and just some things that have gotten different. But I want to start by saying that there's going to be a new league mechanic. There's a new league NPC called Valerie. You can see her art from the press kit there. But Valerie and the new league mechanic, they're not going to be a major part of this video. I'm going to be talking about changes to existing features. So those of you that primarily play in Standard, which I know is a small percentage of the Path of Exile player base, but you're out there. Those of you that are playing Standard primarily, actually everything in this video is going to apply to you, except for the next 30 seconds or so. And that is that there will be some pretty huge crafting implications for the new league mechanic, especially in conjunction with crafting orbs like the Orb of Conflict, the Orb of Dominance. These things that are boss-specific currencies, they're going to be really significant when you get the opportunity to essentially test running them multiple times. We don't know exactly how this is going to work, and it also won't work for everything, but I do think it's going to be really important that we test all of these in the first week or two, and also just have a look at what people much wealthier than you are doing if you want to get a bit of a sense of some of the new crafting options that are available. There's also things like the Orb of Unraveling, all of these sorts of boss-related crafting currencies. You want to remember that they exist because they're going to be really significant in conjunction with this new mechanic. But I did say we're not talking about Valerie, even though I do have that song in my head, specifically the Amy Winehouse version of it, because I hear it all the time at karaoke. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is the massive, massive, massive systems overhaul. That is, what on earth is going on with socket colors. So socket colors have been a thing in all of the time I've played Path of Exile 1. And Path of Exile 1, I have been playing this game since 2013. So there are probably people who are playing Path of Exile 1 today who were not born when the first setup was made of the way that socket colors work. It's worked the same way their entire lives, and now it's suddenly changing. Let's talk about the changes that are taking place. Firstly, socket colors will now be able to roll as white, as well as blue, red, and green. And white sockets have gone from being the best, as they were previously, to now being the worst. You no longer need to match your socket color to the gem color. So you can put a blue support gem or a blue skill gem into a green socket if you want. However, if you do have a match, then you'll gain 10 points of quality bonus. And this is actually pretty significant. So what is this going to mean at various points? Well, quality is not created equal on different gems. So you want to keep that in mind. But I think there's going to be quite a bit of a min-maxing goal of getting exactly perfect colors on any of your items that you want to use. Early in the game though, your build is just going to work a lot easier. There's a lot less friction. The campaign in particular, but also early mapping, you're going to be able to find a 5 link on the ground if you're in early mapping, or a 4 link on the ground if you're in anywhere from the end of Act 2 onwards. You'll be able to find one of these things and it's just immediately usable. If the explicit modifiers on it are worthwhile, then you can just throw it on. And if it's a link upgrade over what you have, you almost certainly throw it on. So, going to be a lot less friction early on. You can just accept that you don't have much of an overlap between the socket colors and the gem colors early on, and just make do, because 10 quality is not essential. 10 quality is a nice bonus if you qualify for it. That said, there's a couple of skills it is going to be more important on. But later in the game, it's going to be harder to perfect this. The reason for this is that Grinding Gear Games are making chromatic orbs, which are currently one of the most common currency items in the game. They're making them substantially rarer. And that's going to mean that ultimately these are not really going to be an early game thing. I don't think you'll get absolutely none of them. I think you'll still be able to use one of them here or there if you really need to, but you're not going to be able to spam them on an item until you're solidly at endgame. So endgame optimization is changing. Endgame optimization is now going to happen later in your progress, but pretty much in every situation, you're going to be ahead. The other thing I really want to call out though is that this is a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous buff to the unique items Skin of the Loyal and Skin of the Lords. These are going to be so much better. I believe, I need to verify this, but I believe that they are always going to generate with no white sockets, which is the best state you can possibly have them in. And you're just going to be able to use them. It doesn't really matter what the colors are. The colors are a bonus. If you can align them perfectly, great. But if you can't, they're still very functioning items. So Skin of the Loyal, Skin of the Lords, I think we're going to see those making a real comeback. They haven't been popular for a while, but they're definitely going to be a lot better in the near future. Next, we have Sanctum. Sanctum is getting gigabuffed because volatile Vaal Orbs, they now live in the Sanctum. So this one was interesting in that it got cheers and it got boos from people. There are people who love the Sanctum. There are people who can tolerate the Sanctum. There are people who loathe the Sanctum. And ultimately, if you play in Trade League and you're one of the people that love the Sanctum, this is the best thing ever. If you're one of the people that loathe the Sanctum, but you play in Trade League, this is like a nothing burger change for you. It means that if you want an original sin will be cheaper because there'll be more people running Sanctum. But if you don't want an original sin and you don't want anything else really expensive out of Sanctum, well, volatile Vaal Orbs will be around. You're not going to find any of them, but you can trade for them if you want them. So ultimately, I think if you play in Trade League, this is just all upside. If you play in solo self-found though, this is something that might give you fear of missing out. You might feel FOMO that pulls you into running the Sanctum content, which you might not want to do. Ultimately though, that's the thing with solo self-found. Solo self-found is all about being pulled to run content you're not interested in running, and ultimately you make up your own mind as to whether a hard mode is more fun or less fun for you, and decide which game mode to play appropriately. That's the Sanctum changes. Sanctum is going to be gaining volatile Vaal Orbs. I think this is a much better solution than reverting the nerfs that they did to Sanctum a while ago. There was a period where Sanctum was giving too many raw Divine Orbs. And the problem with a mechanic that gives too many raw Divine Orbs is that more people can just start flooding into it and keep flooding into it, and that can have a really warping effect on the Trade League economy. Nowadays though, Sanctum is an option, and I think it's going to be a really good spot. If you find yourself sort of starting the league late, I'm going to recommend that you start a Sanctum character. The reason being, demand for volatile Vaal Orbs is just going to go up over the league. And there's a lot of people who have no interest in running the Sanctum. Well, you'll be able to then go and say, hey, I'll go and I'll farm those volatile Vaal Orbs you don't want to farm, and I'll turn around and sell them to people. That will probably be the path of least resistance if you start the league in week 2 or week 3 and you want to get yourself a Mage Blood. Okay, so I said that there were going to be 6 upsides and 1 downside in this patch. If you like Breach, I've got some bad news for you. Breach has been taken out the back and shot. Then the corpse has been dug up and the corpse has been shot again. This is basically the patch notes that are found for 329. It's just a wall of text, but this is what's in them. The average number of monsters in breach packs has been reduced. Monster packs in unstable breaches reduced by 25%. Progress of kills increased by 17% to partially but incompletely compensate for that. Maximum number of simultaneous unstable breaches nerfed to 2 from 3. Swelling ranks, this is one of the notables on the Atlas. This now grants 10% pack size instead of 20%. Small passives that grant 5% pack size are now going to instead cause 5% increased rare monsters. Now, that is then going to stack less effectively with Evolving Hives. Evolving Hives previously had stacked multiplicatively with that, but now it's going to stack additively. Evolving Hives now grants 15% increased rare and magic monsters instead of 25%. Small passives that granted 8% increased magic monsters, they've been nerfed to 5%. Now, here's one that's not getting nerfed. Hive Blood and Womb Gifts, these rewards are not being nerfed. But then the Genesis Tree equipment is weaker, slightly less modifier tier rating, and then there was some really cryptic wording. Now, interpretation 1 of this next wording was that there was more bias towards higher tier base types, which would partially then counteract that. Interpretation 2, though, is that it's actually slightly less biased towards higher tier base types. So it's kind of unclear which of those two is meant. The wording that's used inside the patch notes is not 100% unambiguous. And then there's a lower chance to birth additional equipment items. The maximum number of points you can get in the Genesis tree is reduced to 16 from 20. That's for equipment. And small passives that cause Womb Gifts to birth an additional equipment item, they've been halved in value. Equipment Genesis tree notables for biasing towards specific mod types, they're being nerfed substantially as well. Does this actually kill Breach? Well, the answer is no. And the reason the answer is no is because Breach has exclusive rewards you can't get from anywhere except Breach. These exclusive rewards are the Foulborn Uniques. So what this is going to mean is that Foulborn Uniques are going to get more expensive. And at the same time, all of the other rewards that you're getting from Breach are going to be less valuable as a consequence of all these changes. So where this league, I believe it was something like 5 or 6 divines to get Beric's Respite with the shock transmission mod replaced by shock explosions from Impulse's Broken Heart. Maybe instead of 5 to 6 divines, that might be 20 to 30 divines instead this league. But you're not going to get as many other good things while you're hunting for that Foulborn Beric's Respite. There's a whole bunch of other ways that things will play out. The other thing is that the pressure to play Breach as your first mechanic is a lot weaker, and Breach is also going to no longer outclass a lot of the other in-map juicing options. So for instance, things like Expedition that were kind of eclipsed in 3.28, they may not be eclipsed anymore. So this is going to open up opportunities for other things to shine in its place, but this is also a pretty substantial nerf to Breach. After this, Reflect as a map mod. This has been overhauled. Now, this one's interesting. I got this one wrong on my first reading of it, and I got my reactions to it wrong if you're watching my live stream over on Twitch. I misread some of this. So the most important thing here, in red maps, Physical Thorns Reflect is dealing 800 Fizz damage, Elemental Thorns is dealing 1500 elemental damage. This can be mitigated by everything from resistances, evasion, block, and armor and the like. But when the map has a Reflect modifier on it, every single rare monster in there is going to gain a comparable Thorns modifier, and they will deal backlash damage to you when you hit them. The thing that I got wrong though, is that once a monster deals backlash damage to you, I thought that that monster lost the capacity to deal backlash damage for 100 milliseconds. That was my interpretation of this fourth line. The player only takes Thorns damage once every 0.1 seconds. However, that was wrong. It is not the monster that loses the capacity to deal damage. It is the player becomes immune to this backlash damage. The other thing that's notable is that 0.1 seconds is a really strange time in Path of Exile. It is 3.03 server ticks, give or take a smidgen. So this feels like it rounds up to 4, which actually means that instead of being 100 milliseconds, it's actually 132 milliseconds. This has to be tested in game though. Do not take my immediate thoughts on this as being absolute gospel truth. It may be that it is 99 milliseconds, not 100, that is intended by this line, in which case, yep, it's going to be 99 milliseconds. You're going to be taking a lot more damage than the calculations would otherwise entail. Next up, we have Mercenaries returned, and I know that for those of you that might have watched my live stream, my immediate reaction was pretty much to groan when I heard that Mercenaries were coming back. But Grinding Games actually managed to get them right, I think. What they've done is they've made it so that unless you invest enormously into Mercenaries, you only get them as short-term combat allies. So, let's say that you fight Melkin the Azadine Cutthroat here, and you're not interested in having this guy as a permanent mercenary, and you end up just defeating him, and he then comes along with you, and he tears things up for you for a map or two, then he falls over, goes splat, or whatever happens to him, you never see him again. That's everything ending happily ever after. But if you want to invest properly into Mercenaries, you have a new option to do so. This option will cost you your entire Ascendancy class. That is right, there is a Scion option whereby you can be a specialist in dealing with Mercenaries. And there's an enormous amount of support for this archetype. It's really cool. Most people won't be interested, but it is there as something cool that you can do. But most interestingly of all, should you encounter Melkan, and let's say that Melkan is a terrible mercenary for you personally, but is the absolute dream mercenary for someone else that you know that's playing the game, or someone you don't know, but someone that happens to have a few Divine Orbs ready to trade, well, you can then get a writ. You can defeat Melkan, and then you can take his writ. And this writ can then be a tradable item, and it will cause Melkan to replace whatever mercenary would have been present in a future zone. There's also a lot of cool support for the Mercenaries archetype as well. There's a number of scarabs that are being added. And one thing I think is worth your while keeping in mind is that with the new Mercenary scarabs, something that was the case in 3.26, I'm not guaranteeing it's still the case now, but in 3.26, there were well-rolled unique items that dropped on Mercenaries. Keep an eye on these. The best Venter's Gamble I've ever found and the second best Venter's Gamble I've ever found were both far better than any other Venter's Gamble I've ever seen, and they came in the Mercenaries League as things that were being worn by a Mercenary. What I suspect was happening was that each individual mod on it was independently rolled like 5 or 6 times. So if you ever see a Venter's Gamble in particular, or any other really, really high variance unique item on a Mercenary, just check it out. And there is a scarab that causes Mercenaries to have more and more of these unique items equipped. Second last, I want to talk about the self-cast buffs. So, dozens of spells are getting faster cast times. Dozens of spells are getting better damage. A dozen or so spells are getting better crit. And a small number are getting better AoE. But it's worth noting that most of the time, most spells are not getting all of these at once. There's a couple of exceptions, and these are some of the most exciting spells. So one of the things that I think is among the most exciting is what's happening to Freezing Pulse. Freezing Pulse is getting additional projectiles. Now, it can't shotgun, so this doesn't mean more damage against single target. But what it means is that you can use a clear-based Freezing Pulse, and it will just deal with weaker monsters and big monsters, because you're not needing to spend additional support gems in order to project damage across the screen. So you can use the same version of the skill for weak monsters and for bosses. Some of the other things that seem like they were getting big buffs, there's Crackling Lances getting a big buff. Surprisingly, Shock Nova of Procession seemed to be treading water. I think everyone was expecting that to get nerfed pretty hard. Winter Orb is gaining projectiles, it's gaining all sorts of other buffs. Soul of Reaping is gaining projectiles, and also Unleash support and Greater Unleash support are getting improved as well. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on here when we're talking about self-cast buffs. But at the same time, particularly on staves, caster weapons are getting better affixes that they can roll. And also a number of the good affixes that are not crazy good. So we're not talking about the very best ones, but a number of the genuinely good ones you're happy to see are becoming quite a lot more common. Now, there's going to be more tree support for, and also item support for cost efficiency, which is something that Path of Exile 2 has, and it's the same mechanic as mana reservation efficiency. So with cost efficiency, it's something that functions as a way of decreasing mana costs, but it has diminishing returns built in. So if you spend 100 mana and you've got 25 points of cost efficiency, then you get the benefits of spending 125. But if you get an extra 50 cost efficiency, then you only get the benefits of 175 mana being spent. It's not like there's a multiplicative way of these things stacking, they just stack additively. The thing that matters here though, because a lot of spells are being made faster, cost efficiency actually matters more than you might think. And particularly this is the case, a big identity of lightning spells now is that lightning spells are going to cost a lot of mana, and they're going to have quick cast times. So mana costs are going to go to the moon, but if you can make them work, and there are tools to make them work, then you will see a big payoff there. Finally, I wanted to finish with one of the coolest things that's being added, and this is the Legion Item Casino for unique items. This is something that allows you to boost a unique item beyond its normal limits. The idea here is that you're going to be sacrificing a unique item inside the domain of Timeless Conflict. This item that you sacrificed, it will harvest one of its mods, and it will be, most of the time it'll be deterministic which mod it is, and this then a new unique item will sort of grow around this. But this new unique item will be a drop anywhere unique. So let's say, for example, that you have the unique gloves Null and Void, and you were to then sacrifice them in the domain of Timeless Conflict. Then maybe one of the things that could happen is that that would then turn into Asenath's Gentle Touch. Now, Asenath's Gentle Touch would then have some element of the unique gloves Null and Void. And what element it is, we don't know, but it would be something deterministic. It's important to note that this is only something that can be done in slots that accept armor as scraps. Not entirely clear about quivers, but definitely this is only possible for shields, for chest armor, for helmets, for boots, for gloves, and not available for jewelry. That's important because a lot of people, their first thought is, oh, I want to harvest the Headhunter mod and I want to put that on the Mage Blood. Nah, sorry about that. That's not happening. Also, exact details have got to be confirmed. Like, for instance, one of the items I'm particularly keen to see, or what comes out of it, is the unique item Abrath's Hooves. Abrath's Hooves is a set of unique boots that you probably never wanted to wear in the game, but they have a very powerful modifier on them, and this is the Ignite Transfer mod. This is the same modifier that is found on the unique ring Beric's Respite, and that's the only two places in the game that you can get them. It functions differently to Ignite Proliferation, and it sort of stacks with it. They work mostly synergistically, occasionally at cross purposes, but generally speaking, having both of them is better than having any one, and having any one of them is better than having neither, and having one of them is sometimes better, sometimes worse than having the other. They're basically things that do have a bit of synergy though, and the thing is that it's really hard to spend either an entire ring slot or an entire boot slot, especially with Abrath's Hooves being such a poor item overall. So if we're able to take that from Abrath's Hooves and then potentially regrow it onto a different item, that could be extremely exciting. And that's just one of many thoughts. The thing you want to keep in mind though is that the donor item can be any unique item that's not corrupted, but the recipient item needs to be a drop anywhere unique. And the more common that drop anywhere unique is, the more likely you are to see it. On top of this, it needs to be something where the quality is expressed in armor scraps rather than being a catalyst or a whetstone. Anyways, that is some of the high points out of today's announcement. I am definitely not covering everything here. It's one of those days where there's just so much to go through. There's going to be a whole bunch that's more to be said when we're looking at some of the mechanics that are being added to the game. There's going to be a whole lot more to be said about so many other things over in this, like, for instance, the new system with descending into the depths, planning a voyage. But most significantly, I think, is this Allflame crafting. That needs its own video, though, especially once we start getting a little bit more information about it. And I think what I might do is leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.